San Antonio's origins lie in its historic missions, all of which we treasure and one of which we remember as the Alamo. It was in Querétaro, Mexico, that the Spanish missionaries were taught the languages and the customs and the indigenous populations they would encounter here. It was in Querétaro that they learned the survival skills they would need to travel north to the outer boundaries of New Spain to establish these missions. It was there where the San Antonio of today took root and grew, and it is there that the San Antonio's blended culture was born. Simply put, if it weren't for Querétaro, there would be no missions, no Alamo, and no San Antonio. Now, after more than 300 years, we rediscover and celebrate San Antonio's deep connection with Querétaro through artistic and cultural expression, a reunion 3 centuries in the making.
You know, the connection between Querétaro and San Antonio lies very deep in both cities' histories. And I think it's a story that has taken a long time to come to light.
Lo que unió en lo que es Querétaro, las misiones de Sierra Gorda y San Antonio, Texas, pues fue la Santa Cruz de los Milagros, este gran conjunto conventual en el lugar de la fundación de Querétaro, desde 1531, donde inicia ahí una pequeña capilla, y ahí se establece uno de los conventos, uno de los templos y conventos más importantes de América.
El primer colegio de propaganda fide, es decir, el primer convento de preparación de clérigos franciscanos para difundir la fe.
Y bueno, pues aquí van a tener una preparación especial estos misioneros y unos se van a ir hacia lo que es la Sierra Gorda, ¿no? A fundar las 5 misiones de la Sierra Gorda. Por otro lado hay otro camino, ¿no? que se va hacia el este, que es el camino real a los Texas. Esta zona de Saltillo, Monclova, etcétera, hasta llegar a lo que hoy día es San Antonio.
Querétaro's influence as a point of development for the North is the most important one. All of this would not exist. Querétaro was center of this huge colonization and also other interests of the crowd. They were looking for gold and silver.
The thing about the missionaries that came from Querétaro to San Antonio is that they were part of this much, much bigger effort by Spain, obviously, to colonize the New World. Of course, this was part of their overall project. And the amazing thing was how much territory Spain was able to actually colonize and control. And one of the strategies was to be able to do it with church and state working together. And so that was the formula in which they wanted to be able to spread from the interior of Mexico to the north. They had claimed all of what is now the southwestern part of the United States, and so their strategy was it would be the missionaries going with soldiers. And the soldiers would always be in a presidio, not too far away, but not too close to the missions. And the idea was that the Franciscans wanted to work with the people, wanted to organize them, wanted to make these missionary-led communities. And at the same time, they know they needed the soldiers for protection because not all of the indigenous or Native Americans wanted to cooperate. And some of them really felt that these were intruders, and so they attacked the missions on a regular basis. The most important thing was that they wanted to come and form communities. And they didn't want to impose on the Native Americans that they had to do everything the Spanish way. And so they wanted to come to be able to listen to the people, to speak to them in their language if they could, to be able to, of course, introduce Christianity and Catholicism to them, and to gather them into communities. The missionaries said, we are not coming to impose anything on them. We're coming as friends. We're coming to learn who they are. We're coming to invite them into a relationship with us. And so that's kind of the way they did it.
Todos ellos partían en su misionar desde Querétaro, del Convento de la Cruz, hasta pasando por la Sierra Gorda, Zacatecas, Coahuila, y llegaban hasta lo que ahora conocemos como el Álamo, que para ellos pues eran tierras inhóspitas.
We have quite a few expedition diaries, and the conditions were really tough, and people wrote about what they encountered, how hard it was. They also recorded little bits of joy and optimism that they encountered water and food and plants and people who were friendly to them. But they survived on sheer determination and faith. They didn't have enough to eat, they were sick, there was terrible heat, often lack of water, and it was their deep, deep commitment to their faith and their determination to try and find souls to convert that sustained them.
Because they had to know languages, they had to know how to build, they had to know how to interact, they had to know how to explain a very complex theology of the Catholic faith in the best way possible, because ultimately they were there to communicate. And you have to understand, for Franciscans, they were not, as part of their vow of poverty, they did not ride horses. So you wouldn't usually find a Franciscan ever on a horse. You might find a Franciscan on a donkey. That was permitted, but not a horse.
The pattern of colonization that brought the Spanish to central Texas was a very, very old one, and it began in the Iberian Peninsula in the 9th century as part of the so-called Reconquista, as small bands of Christian warriors tried to push southward into Islamic territory. And they would establish a castle and a town, and they would try to defend it, and they would try to populate it. And once it was stable, then they would push farther south. And so this pattern of creating a settlement, creating a church, making sure that it could be defended, is one that the Spanish had been doing for almost 800 years when they came to central Texas. So they had a formula and they knew what worked. And they would retreat if they needed to, but their goal was to just push the border forward a little bit at a time in order to be able to expand the population. And so here in San Antonio, we are living with a legacy of that very old pattern of colonization that the Spanish used inside the Iberian Peninsula.
Este esquema de cooperativas sociales en donde había conocimiento y manejo del agua, de la tierra, de los árboles frutales, pues es lo que logró que pudieran conquistar territorios que a mediados del siglo XVIII no había logrado la corona española, ni con las demás órdenes, ni con los soldados, ¿no? Y por eso siempre hay guarniciones, siempre hay conventos y guarniciones, ¿no? Porque los soldados siempre van acompañando a los frailes, a los franciscanos y de cualquier orden. No iban solos, siempre iban con un cierto número de militares que los iban custodiando.
Not all the orders had missionaries well prepared to travel long distances on foot, without, purified water, without sneakers, without GPS. You may feel that these people were heroes.
Every group was a different size, but typically when the Spanish sent groups northward to explore possibilities for missions and then to found them, they almost always had 3 groups together. They had soldiers, they had priests, and they had a small contingent of townspeople.
Many places in the United States have Spanish names. Let's talk about Colorado. Colorado, full of color. That's the red color for us. So it was the name of the river that gave the name of the state, Colorado. Nevada. Nevada is full of snow. So it's the land with snow, La Tierra Nevada, Florida. Florida, the name of this state and peninsula, it comes from the celebration of the first Mass in Easter, La Pascua Florida. And San Agustin in Florida is the oldest Spanish city in the United States. So we can see all around from the border of Mexico to the border of Canada, and we will find hundreds, 1,000, more than 1,000 of places with the Spanish names.
Before the advent of borders, we were one people, indigenous people. And so this relationship with Querétaro was really a reminder that the two communities are indelibly linked.
I think to get the most out of that story, you kind of have to start before any Europeans are even here. So San Antonio is at a really special place within what is now Texas, or what was New Spain, or what was Mexico. And in every Texas history book that 4th or 7th graders look at, they will see a map of the geographic regions of Texas and a map of what indigenous people were present in Texas prior to colonization.
San Antonio has a 10,000-year history of an indigenous occupation. That's what at least archaeology is telling us. And if you were to hear this, when you hear the story of San Antonio being told prior to us coming onto the scene and changing the narrative, you would think that when the Spanish arrived here, they were greeted by mariachis, forgetting the 10,000-year history. And so I think that was the most important story that had been left out of the narrative of San Antonio.
San Antonio is located at the confluence of several unique geographic regions, is also right on the edge of the most important geographic feature in the entire state of Texas, the Balcones Escarpment. And so anytime it rains, all of that organic matter that's flowing down one side of the Balcones Escarpment has landed in San Antonio, making it a pretty fertile place even prior to colonization by European people. But it's also in sort of this no man's land of the different indigenous groups that are inhabiting Texas at the time. So groups that are relatively powerful in indigenous Texas, the Hasinai, the Apache, the Karankawa, are all meeting in San Antonio to sometimes trade with each other, but also to raid upon the lesser successful indigenous groups like the Colhuitecans, which is more of a geographic designation than it is any sort of community or tribal identity. So all of these different groups are actually meeting in San Antonio, and it's not a place that belongs to any one particular group.
What we could think of as the great tragic aspect of the destiny of these lands, when we think about the Españoles arriving here, how the story might have gone very differently. If the Españoles had been prepared to recognize a new people who they had not known anything of, who had their own culture and beliefs. They didn't have cities like the Mexica did in Mesoamerica and Central Mexico. They didn't leave cities behind or effigies or pyramids, but they had cultura, they had technologies, and if the Españoles had been inquisitive about that, had been interested in preserving and documenting, rather than transplanting what they believed was the true nature of faith and religion and spirituality, to erase that which was indigenous and to overlay this Spanish transmission, things could have gone very differently. The Cuban patriot essayist José Martí said that the conquistadores stole a page from the universe that we will never know.
I think the tie between Querétaro and San Antonio, that's a story that needs to be told, because I can tell you that's not something I learned in school, and I doubt that children are learning it now. I mean, my 8th grader and my 6th grader have not mentioned it, and they've already taken Texas history. So it's something, there's so many surprises, and there's, I mean, you know, not only that, there was the Native Americans that were here, there was the Spanish, like it really was a real melting pot. And I think it's just something that is surprising, but it needs to be told because people need to know their history.
We're like 3rd or 4th generation. We studied in the United States, and this history is never taught to us, ever taught to us. So it's not until we search it out on our own or specialize in the university level on it do we know about who we are.
So the Sistema de Castas emerges in Mexico as a way of trying to at least, if you couldn't contain mestizaje, if everybody was going to hook up and mix with everybody else from all over the world and create these new human hybrid amalgams, the Españoles thought, well, at least we can create this taxonomy. We can create a system to identify what you get when you mix what with what, which was what the Casta system was really about. It was about the farther you got from Español, the less your moral worth, was. And that was the way the Sistema de Castas really worked. It would take, once an Español mixed with somebody else, whether Africano or Indígena or Chino, they would then take 3 generations of mixing back with Españoles before they could be Español again. Hermenegildo Bustos, he comes up in the late 19th century. So the Casta system is already well established, the genre of paintings. In Bustos' paintings, he begins to paint the mestizo face with truth, compassion, dignity, and this extraordinary presence, this gaze. He becomes enormously influential for Mexican artists like Kahlo, Orozco, Siqueiros, Rivera. He was a kind of an exemplar to them of painting the truth of Mexicanidad. So, I think about his story in terms of the way that the Sistema de Castas was overturned and the way that by the time we get into this period in the 18th century and 19th century, that we've got this very different scenario emerging of mestizo peoples in places like Querétaro and San Antonio that are evocative of this transformation of mestizaje from something that was a source of shame to the source of pride.
Most of the people in San Antonio have for centuries connected with different regions of Mexico. So culture and art and music are the most fabulous way to be able to explain your feelings, your emotions, your sentimiento. This sentimiento never goes away. You're always Mexican. You might live in an Anglo community, but the sentimiento de Mexicano is with you in your heart, and you explain it. That's why this jarabe arabeño is that. It's telling the story of the trials, the tribulations, but it's how you survived all of this and found meaning between all these elements.
The United States calls it the Rio Grande. Mexicans call it the Rio Bravo. But Grande and Bravo, I mean, you put that together and look what has happened when these cultures have exchanged ideas and art and music and language and the new creations. It's grand and it's brave. So I think it's a great combination.
The College of Santa Cruz de Querétaro is one of the early colleges for sending missionaries north. And they started in about 1683. And with the foundation of that college, they started looking at founding missions and basically setting a foothold in northern Spain. And so if you look early on, 1519, Spain basically lands on the coast of Texas. Well, they don't do much with it. Cabeza de Vaca comes through,
several conquistadors come through, but that's as far as it gets. But what they start to notice is that with the Louisiana territory and the French coming, something needs to be done. So they start sending missionaries north, looking for fabled forts and towns built by the French in Texas. Well, there was one little fort, and that didn't last too long. But it's already set that idea in motion. So when you think about the missionaries from Querétaro, they come north, they end up in what is present-day Guerrero in northern Mexico, and then from there they start looking at ways to make an entrada into Texas. They come exploring in 1709 to the San Antonio River area, and that had been named the Rio San Antonio in 1691. Well, they come in 1709 and they rename it San Antonio for a second time. So it was meant to be.
So the history of how it came is fascinating because it is part of our San Antonio history, that we were established by the Catholic Church coming over with its priests and then settling in the development of the missions. Though San Antonio had already been a thriving place because it was inhabited by the First Nation people or Native Americans. And so therefore you have that intersection between language, culture, and history. And that's what makes it very unique.
If they are difficult conversations, that's the beauty of art, is to put things up on the front. Again, excavate and then inspect and then reflect on those things.
History is much more than the Battle of the Alamo. The Battle of the Alamo is just one event in a very recent story, no? When we have a very old history in this region, like as far as, I don't know exactly, 500 years before Common Era.
I think that San Antonio's place and the Alamo's place in Texas history, Mexican history, American history, a lot of that would not have happened had it not been for the friars that came here from Querétaro and established the first mission here in San Antonio, Mission San Antonio de Valero. And that because of that, a lot of Texan life and identity has sprung forth or emanated from this place, and I think that that's true today.
So in the 1690s, Spain decides that they do need to put a buffer zone and stop the French from crossing into Texas from Louisiana, because the French do occupy Louisiana territory and the Mississippi River. So it's a very long travel part to go from Querétaro, Zacatecas, Coahuila to East Texas. And that's really how San Antonio becomes important initially. It's the way station, it's the halfway point. So they have 400 miles to travel, and then they come back in 1716 and say, this is when they began to explore the idea that they're going to be either on the Guadalupe River, present-day San Marcos, possibly on the Colorado River, not too far from Austin. And those are some possibilities. San Antonio really is an afterthought. It becomes important when they realize that the Indians here are friendly. In East Texas, total resistance. On the Gulf of Garagawas, they are totally opposed to any efforts by the Spanish to establish colonies there, settlement there, and it's just warfare on those bases there.
So the important thing to remember here is that these expeditions begin 2 centuries after the conquest, 200 years after the conquest. So 1520, and then in 1720, 1718, San Antonio is founded.
The Alamo was founded in 1718, and that is where the city of San Antonio takes its founding date. Even though the Alamo was a mission and not meant to be permanent, it was 1718, and that's where we say this is our beginning.
So Querétaro is key to establishing missions through different parts of Texas, 16 of them. It can be simply and honestly said that the Querétaro friars are responsible for the building of Texas, the emergence of Texas. Texas is what it is because of these early efforts. These are the founding fathers of Texas. It is something that we don't know. We think that somehow or another Texas history starts with the 1820s with Stephen F. Austin. It starts 100 years earlier with the founding of San Antonio, because East Texas doesn't succeed. The Gulf cities don't succeed. So San Antonio is key to everything we know and appreciate about the establishment and founding of Texas.